Everyone thinks they know New York, bustling cities, massive waterfalls, and rolling mountains. But what if I told you the ground beneath that famous skyline is changing right now, and new geological formations are being discovered almost every year? From hidden caves to shifting coastlines, New York's geography isn't frozen in the past. It's alive, evolving, and full of surprises. We've pulled together brand new facts that only a handful of researchers could tell you about. Let's kick things off with number 50. You won't see this one listed on any map. Mountains losing ground faster. Fact 50. Mountains don't last forever. The Adirondacks and Catskills look steady, but new 2025 data shows they're being worn down much faster than before. Heavy rainstorms tied to a warming climate are hammering these ranges with unusual force. Instead of slow, steady erosion stretching across thousands of years, scientists are now documenting changes unfolding in just a few decades. Rainfall doesn't just wash away soil, it loosens entire shelves of rock. Researchers measuring runoff have found that in some valleys, soil loss has doubled compared to what was recorded 20 years ago. That means gullies appear where tree cover once stood firm, and rocky faces show fresh fractures with each major storm cycle. When that process accelerates, the shape of the mountain itself starts to shift within a human lifetime. This breakdown creates ripple effects. Hillsides that stay intact for centuries suddenly grow unstable, sending sediment surging into rivers and smothering aquatic habitats. Forests clinging to shallow soils face higher risks of collapse, and wildlife that depends on these slopes has to adapt to new, unstable terrain. So while these mountains may look untouched from a distance, they're constantly shedding, shrinking, and reshaping. In 2025, New York's peaks are being redefined at a pace people can actually witness. Cleaner Hudson, but still struggling. Fact 49. For years, the Hudson River carried a reputation as one of the dirtiest waterways in the country. Industrial waste, sewage, and the long-lasting impact of toxic PCBs made huge stretches unsafe for both wildlife and people. But by 2025, new monitoring reports tell a more complicated story. Large-scale cleanup campaigns, including dredging and decades of pollution controls, have steadily pushed water quality in a better direction. In some sections north of Albany, oxygen levels and fish populations are healthier than they've been in decades. That progress is real, but the river isn't free from threats. Instead of large chemical discharges, today's challenges come from sources that weren't tracked in the past. Microplastics now turn up everywhere in water samples, breaking down from packaging, clothing fibers, and surface litter that finds its way into the river. Storm runoff is another major player. When extreme rainfall hits paved streets, it pushes oil, fertilizer, and untreated waste into the river all at once. These sudden surges undo much of the gradual progress cleanup efforts achieve. The result is a river that is far cleaner compared to 30 or 40 years ago, but at the same time facing hazards researchers didn't measure until recently. In 2025, the Hudson's fight has shifted from industrial toxins to the invisible pollutants of the modern age. Unearthed Adirondack secrets. Fact 48. The Adirondacks are best known for their rugged peaks and untamed forests, but in 2025, researchers working beneath the tree line uncovered something unexpected. Archaeologists found tools and artifacts that had never been recorded before, preserved in soil layers usually overlooked during past surveys. These discoveries suggest that people were living in and moving through this region thousands of years earlier than experts once believed. Stone blades and worked points show that hunting communities made use of the mountains long before European settlement. The surprising part is not just the age, it's what the location tells us. Far from being an isolated wilderness, the Adirondacks now appear to have been part of a much wider prehistoric network of trade and migration. Items crafted from stone, not native to the area, point to connections stretching across regions, indicating steady contact between groups separated by hundreds of miles. What made these artifacts survive is the Adirondacks' harsh soil. Rocky deposits and mineral-rich ground acted almost like a protective layer, keeping delicate items intact where in other northeastern regions they would have decayed. For scientists, that means each discovery adds a rare piece to the human puzzle. In 2025, the Adirondacks are not only peaks of ancient rock, they are rewriting who walked these mountains first. New York's shrinking shorelines. Fact 47. If you walk the shoreline of Long Island or stand in the tidal zones of the lower Hudson today, it doesn't look the same as it did just a decade ago. High tide lines now reach farther inland, and some beaches that were once wide stretches of sand have narrowed to just a few steps. The visible change isn't from storms alone. It reflects steady sea level rise that New York is recording year after year. The newest coastal data collected in 2025 confirms that the state has lost hundreds of acres of shoreline to higher tides alone. Flood zones that used to only activate in hurricanes now expand during normal seasonal cycles. This erosion doesn't only affect homes and properties, it also eats into wetlands that protect towns from storm surges, beaches that serve as nesting grounds, and even the edges of historic landmarks that once stood safely back from the water. Scientists reviewing current maps warn that some neighborhoods are slipping past a point of temporary flooding into something more permanent. In parts of southern Long Island, what was called high water only 10 years ago is now the daily norm. New York's coastline isn't eroding slowly over centuries, it's disappearing at a pace people can track within their own lifetimes. Subway meets bedrock. Fact 46. Expanding New York City's subway system is not just a test of budget and planning, it's a direct fight with the ground itself. In 2025, new tunnel projects are cutting into some of the most challenging geology anywhere in the state. Much of Manhattan rests on ancient Manhattan schist, a rock layer formed more than 450 million years ago. This layer is hard enough to support skyscrapers, but it doesn't behave the same way in every location. Some areas are solid and dependable, while others are fractured with hidden seams and soft zones that shift when drilled. Engineers report that digging rigs encounter sudden surprises. Groundwater seeping through cracks flood sections that were expected to stay dry. Fissures widen without warning, forcing delays and costly reinforcements. Soil pockets, buried long before the first streets were even planned, collapse under pressure, leaving crews scrambling to stabilize the ground. These challenges slow construction, but also expose new insights. Every unexpected rock face cut open by a drill shows off layers geologists have never seen before. Each new tunnel is essentially a slice through time, revealing evidence of mountain-building collisions and long-buried seabeds. New York's subway expansion is therefore not only about moving passengers underground, it is one of the largest live geology lessons happening anywhere in the country. Catskill wildlife on the comeback. Fact 45. Just a few decades ago, the Catskills felt strangely empty of their larger animals. Bobcats were rarely seen, black bear numbers were thin, and the streams lacked the signs of beaver colonies that once shaped the valleys. By 2025, surveys paint a very different picture. A mix of tighter hunting rules, protected corridors, and forest regrowth has allowed populations to steadily increase, filling in gaps that had been missing for generations. Beavers are among the most noticeable. Their dams are now scattered across streams that had run freely for years. These structures don't just hold water, they create entire new wetlands. The ponds slow floods during heavy rains, trap sediment, and provide habitat for fish, amphibians, and birds. Black bears are following the return of acorns and berry thickets, with sightings growing across counties that once reported only rare visits. Predators that need wide, quiet ranges, like bobcats and coyotes, are also gaining strength. Their recovery is a sign that smaller prey populations are being kept in check, which restores balance to the whole food web. Ecologists often call this a keystone effect, where the return of top animals stabilizes the forest itself. In 2025, the Catskills feel more alive than they have in nearly 100 years. Reservoirs under the microscope. Fact 44. New York City runs on something most people never see, the vast system of reservoirs that hold its drinking water. No other city in the country relies so heavily on stored rain and river water captured far from its streets. In 2025, updated testing of these reservoirs shows both strong results and new vulnerabilities that weren't a concern decades ago. The Catskill and Delaware supplies remain among the cleanest urban water sources on Earth. Their natural filtration comes from protected forests that funnel runoff into carefully designed networks of lakes and tunnels. For much of the 20th century, that protection was enough to keep the water clear and reliable. But the picture has changed with stronger storms. Heavy rainfall now washes more nitrogen and phosphorus into the system, nutrients that fuel outbreaks of algae. When algal blooms grow, they block sunlight, choke ecosystems, and reduce clarity in the reservoirs. Scientists are now able to track these changes with a precision never imagined before. Satellite sensors monitor color shifts at the surface, while ground-based instruments test the chemistry hour by hour. The system still provides some of the purest city water on the planet, but climate patterns mean it needs closer watch than ever before. Long Island's shifting base. Fact 43. When most people picture Long Island, they see sandy beaches, suburbs, and highways stretching east. But beneath that surface lies a foundation that tells a very different story. Recent geological surveys in 2025 confirmed that Long Island is not a single slab of land, but the byproduct of one of the Ice Age's largest construction projects. As massive glaciers advanced and retreated, they carried mountains of rock, sand, and clay with them. When the ice finally melted, it dropped that load in a line so huge it shaped the island we know today. In simple terms, Long Island is a giant glacial deposit frozen into the landscape. This structure has left more than just rolling hills and coastal bluffs. Scientists mapping the island's base recently detected vast aquifers buried deep under its sandy soils. These aquifers act like underground reservoirs, holding fresh water that millions of residents depend on every single day, but their position makes them fragile. With rising seas pushing saltwater inland, some of those freshwater pockets are showing early signs of intrusion, a process that could turn drinkable water supplies into brackish, unusable sources over time. Understanding how this glacial formation works is now critical. Long Island isn't just an island, it's a time capsule from the Ice Age that still shifts under modern pressure. Flood zones on the move. Fact 42. The flood maps many New Yorkers grew up with are no longer accurate. FEMA's 2025 redraw has shifted the official flood zones across the state in ways that would have seemed unthinkable a generation ago. Thousands of homes are now listed inside risk areas that had never been considered vulnerable before. This change reflects the new normal: heavier rainfall, flash floods, and steady sea rise that are putting pressure on nearly every watershed in the region. Nowhere is this more visible than the Hudson Valley and Long Island. These two areas have seen the largest expansions, adding entire neighborhoods to the flood zone registry. Families who never once worried about high water are now facing mandatory flood insurance bills. For many, it isn't just a financial strain, but also a signal that extreme weather has already redrawn the environment around them. The map changes go beyond homes. Several school districts and major roadways are now classified inside these revised zones, meaning entire communities depend on routes that could become impassable during storms. Engineers are studying how these updates will reshape future building codes, property values, and even patterns of growth. In 2025, New York's flood danger isn't just a hypothetical, it's officially rewritten on the map. Unwanted guests in every ecosystem. Fact 41. New York's ecosystems are facing a new wave of invaders, and they're arriving faster than before. The spotted lanternfly is one of the most visible examples. It has spread across counties from the Hudson Valley into parts of the Catskills, and vineyards have felt its impact directly. These insects feed on grapevines, leaving behind damaged crops that weaken wine production across a region known for its wineries. Farmers have tried traps and nets, but rising temperatures allow the insects to expand their range more quickly than early models predicted. In the waterways, zebra mussels continue to cause trouble. They attach themselves to any surface, from dock pilings to boat hulls, and spread in dense clusters. Their presence strips nutrients out of lakes, starving native fish populations that depend on those food sources. Once established, they are nearly impossible to remove, and they've already reshaped entire lake ecosystems across upstate New York. It doesn't stop there. Warmer winters and accelerating trade routes allow a steady stream of new species to gain footholds. Some invasive plants change soil chemistry by altering nitrogen cycles, making it harder for native forests to regenerate. These small shifts add up to major consequences. By 2025, scientists say outside species represent as large a threat to New York's environment as climate pressures themselves. The Great Lakes at new levels. Fact 40. For a long time, people thought of the Great Lakes as steady, almost timeless bodies of water. They looked like they stayed the same no matter what happened around them. But new numbers from 2025 show that idea doesn't hold anymore. Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, the two that shape New York's northern edge, have swung between record highs and record lows in just a single decade. These changes used to take centuries. Now they're happening fast enough for residents to notice within a few years. Rising water pushes farther onto the shoreline, eroding bluffs and eating away at fragile beaches. Then, just as communities start adapting, levels drop and expose wide mudflats and unstable docks. Both extremes bring trouble. Harbors rely on consistent depths for shipping, and when water swings too far in either direction, boats can ground out or navigation channels become unsafe. In ports along Lake Ontario, engineers are already raising docks and redesigning walls, only to reconsider those plans when water retreats a few years later. The culprit is a climate system locked into faster cycles. Changing rainfall patterns and shifting ice cover speed up how much water enters or leaves the lakes each year. In 2025, the Great Lakes act less like permanent fixtures and more like unpredictable tide pools reshaping New York's edge. Niagara's new flow. Fact 39. Niagara Falls may look like the same unstoppable wall of water it has always been, but the numbers in 2025 tell a different story. Flow patterns have shifted in ways that would surprise most visitors. Traditionally, the volume of water over the falls has stayed relatively steady throughout the year, regulated by treaties and agreements with Canada and the United States. Recently, though, the combination of climate variation and human management has altered that balance. One of the biggest influences comes from warmer conditions across the Great Lakes watershed. Faster ice melts in the spring are sending more water downriver in shorter bursts, creating seasonal surges much larger than in past decades. At the same time, periods of dry winter weather are producing weaker flows that occasionally lower the curtain of water to levels locals haven't seen in generations. These shifts make the falls appear louder and more forceful in summer, while the off-season sometimes feels noticeably restrained. Hydropower operations also play a role. Engineers divert water away from the main cascades to produce electricity, but must ensure that enough volume remains to satisfy tourism. Striking that balance means the falls are now managed like an adjustable system. In 2025, even this world-famous waterfall depends on climate data to decide how much water people actually see. NYC's scorching heat islands. Fact 38. Cities don't just get warmer, they actually create their own microclimates. Nowhere is that clearer than New York City in 2025. Data shows that downtown neighborhoods can run as much as 9 degrees hotter than nearby rural areas during peak summer. The reason is simple: the city's surfaces. Asphalt, concrete, and glass lock in heat all day and release it slowly at night, while open landscapes shed that energy far more quickly. The result is an urban heat island effect that has grown into a defining part of New York's modern geography. This intensity isn't only about comfort. Higher temperatures strain energy systems as millions of people switch on air conditioners at the same time. Power grids work harder, and blackouts become more likely during heat waves. That added stress also worsens air quality because hotter conditions accelerate ground-level ozone production. And for people with respiratory conditions or without reliable access to cooling, the health risks are immediate. To address it, the city has been testing new approaches. Rooftop gardens, reflective coatings on buildings, and expanded tree canopy projects are all designed to cool pockets of neighborhoods. Some blocks show measurable drops in surface temperature after changes. In the bigger picture, New York's landscape isn't only concrete and steel, it's a system constantly reshaped by the heat it generates. Upstate winds reshaping land. Fact 37. Wind farms may sound like something that only changes the power grid, but in 2025, their effect on the land itself is hard to miss. Across northern New York, large clusters of turbines have risen in specific regions, especially along the Tug Hill Plateau and through the Champlain Valley. These aren't single towers in isolation. They stand in rows that stretch for miles, marking ridges and open ground once shaped only by farms, fields, and forest. Building these installations has required more than placing machines in empty space. To reach steady winds, wide corridors must be cleared, altering tree lines and carving through wooded land that had stood for generations. Gravel access roads run between them, cutting through hillsides and creating clear breaks in the natural landscape. As a result, parts of rural New York now carry straight lines and stark openings that stand out against the irregular shapes of valleys and ridges. The turbines themselves shift the skyline. Where distant views once offered nothing but rolling countryside, giant blades now rotate day and night, visible for miles. Supporters argue they balance out fossil fuel use, but no matter the perspective, they are permanent changes etched into the land. In 2025, renewable energy is quite literally reshaping New York's geography. Finger Lakes, redefined depths. Fact 36. Most people look at a map of the Finger Lakes and assume everything about them has already been measured and recorded. They're long, narrow, and deep glacial lakes. What more could surprise anyone? But in 2025, updated sonar surveys of Seneca and Cayuga revealed something new hiding below the surface. At certain points, both lakes drop into trenches much deeper than earlier readings ever detected. In some cases, this added hundreds of unexpected feet to previously accepted depth records. The discovery came from advances in sonar imaging. Older equipment provided approximations, sketching out depth profiles with limited resolution. Modern systems, however, map the bottom in extreme detail, identifying narrow channels and sudden plunges concealed between ridges of lakebed sediment. These hidden depressions complicate how water flows within the lakes. Instead of smooth circulation, currents plunge into colder zones, creating isolated pockets at the very bottom. Within these zones, researchers are finding ecosystems that had been entirely missed. Colder, oxygen-limited water holds unique species distributions compared to upper layers. That means decades of ecological research only told part of the story. Just as important, the new measurements refine ideas of how glaciers carved the Finger Lakes in the first place. In 2025, these lakes remain deeper, colder, and more mysterious than maps ever suggested. Southern Tier, sliding earth. Fact 35. Not every threat to New York comes with high winds or crashing waves. In the Southern Tier, one of the quietest but most destructive hazards is the land itself beginning to slide. Hills that once looked locked and permanent are now shifting under the stress of saturated ground. With heavier rains falling more often, slopes soak up water until the soil breaks loose, pulling chunks of earth downhill. Highways cutting across valleys are some of the first places to feel it. Pavement begins to crack, guardrails tilt out of line, and whole lanes dip as the ground beneath them creeps inch by inch. It's not only roads under strain, neighborhoods built into these rolling hillsides face the same risks. Foundations settle unevenly, and yards sprout sudden fissures that never existed before. Geologists have been tracking spots across the region, and the results are troubling. Land believed stable for decades is now moving after just a few extreme storms. Modern GPS sensors placed on vulnerable slopes show constant micro-movements, giving officials early warnings before larger collapses can strike. Even with technology, predicting the exact moment a hillside will give way isn't simple. By 2025, the Southern Tier has gained an uneasy new reality. Landscapes once trusted to hold firm are actively on the move. Crowds vs. wilderness. Fact 34. New York's population density isn't limited to cities anymore. In 2025, the impact of people spreads deep into areas once considered remote. Trails that once saw modest traffic now host millions of visitors each year, particularly in the Adirondack Park. Over the past decade, recorded hiking pressure there has nearly doubled. Forest paths that could once recover after a busy season now show exposed roots and wide erosion scars that don't heal between summers. This kind of strain adds up over time. Soil in heavily visited spots becomes compacted under constant foot traffic, pressing the ground into hard surfaces where new plants can't take hold. Instead of a living forest floor, repeated steps grind soil into packed dirt. When rain comes, water runs over the surface instead of soaking in, washing away what little loose soil is left. Recovery slows, plants vanish, and the terrain takes on a new, worn-out look that isn't entirely natural. Researchers now warn that human impact can rival some effects of climate change in these reserves. More visitors mean heavier pressure on fragile land that evolved without this constant attention. Even in the wildest parts of New York, people are reshaping geography just by being present in such large numbers. Fresh wilderness protection wins. Fact 33. Even as cities keep stretching outward, New York has made a major move in the opposite direction.